Everyone who watched this footage focused on the subject. That was the mistake. Because if you pull your eyes away from it just for a second and look at the tree line to the left, something else becomes visible. Something that was never flagged in any forensic breakdown, never surfaced in any analytical thread, never mentioned across the dozens of response videos that dissected this clip, frame by frame. A second shape, motionless, partially occluded behind the trunk of a Douglas fir, dark enough to miss on a casual watch. Unmistakable once you know where to look. Not the subject everyone has spent 3 years debating. Something else. Already positioned, already still, already watching before Daniel Marsh ever entered that clearing. And that one detail changes everything. Not just about this footage, about every encounter like it. Stay with me. Because by the end of this, the clip you thought you understood is going to look like something you've never seen before. Daniel Marsh was not a recreational hiker. That distinction matters more than almost anything else about this case. Most anomalous wildlife footage comes from people who are unfamiliar with remote environments, people whose inexperience might reasonably explain a misidentification, people who don't know what a black bear looks like at 60 meters in low light, people who have never spent a night alone in backcountry wilderness. Daniel wasn't any of those things. 14 years of contracted fieldwork across Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. More nights alone in remote terrain than most people spend outdoors in a lifetime. The kind of environmental literacy that takes years to develop the ability to read a hillside, identify disturbance patterns, distinguish between species at distance by movement signature alone. He was, by every professional measure, exactly the category of witness whose account is hardest to dismiss. In October of 2019, he was contracted to remap a ridge corridor outside Steele Creek, Montana. Backcountry, private forestry access, 40 miles from the nearest paved road. A survey corridor untouched for over 2 decades. He drove in alone on a Tuesday morning, logged through the gate, shouldered his pack. 2 days of work scheduled. He was out in one. The clip he uploaded that evening was 47 seconds. No title, no description. 1 line of text. Can someone tell me what this is? Serious answers only. 2 million views in 4 days. The digital forensics community hit a deadlock almost immediately. Frame-by-frame reconstruction. Gait analysis against the 1,967 Patterson-Gimlin benchmark. Limb ratio comparisons. 3 years of debate that produced exactly what these cases always produce. Nothing confirmed. Nothing dismissed. But here's what nobody did. Nobody examined the geometry of the clearing. Nobody mapped the spatial relationship between Daniel's position, the subject on the boulder, and the shadows at his back. Nobody looked at where everything was placed. Here's what the footage shows on the surface. A large, dark-furred subject, seated on a moss-covered granite boulder at the far edge of a natural clearing. Broad shoulders, long arms resting across the knees, chest wide and deep. Cranial mass, inconsistent with any documented regional fauna. And it doesn't move. Not when Daniel stops walking. Not when he raises the camera. Not when he takes 3 steps left to reframe the shot. For the full 47 seconds of the recording, nothing. No postural shift. No muscle loading. No orientation toward escape. The behavioral research community has a specific term for this. Active non-response. Not the frozen stillness of a prey animal caught in the open. Not the threat display rigidity of a territorial predator. Something more deliberate, a sustained, calibrated stillness that communicates not fear, not aggression, but indifference. A posture that says, your presence has been registered, assessed, and deemed beneath the threshold of a reaction. Active non-response isn't common in wildlife documentation. It is the behavioral signature of a subject that has already decided the outcome of the encounter before the encounter begins. Or at least, that's what it looks like. Because at the 1-7-second mark, something changes. The subject's head rotates, slow, precise, not toward the camera, away from it, approximately 30 degrees toward the tree line on its left flank. Most analysts log this as a sound response. Something moved in the trees. The subject heard it and turned. That interpretation is wrong, because at the exact frame of that rotation, not a second before, not a second after, there is a shadow displacement approximately 30 meters behind Daniel's position, a dark mass, moving with slow, weight-bearing deliberation between 2 fir trees, and then stopping, Immediately, completely, as if it received a signal to hold. Two positions, two subjects, one in front of Daniel, holding his full visual attention, one behind him, moving through the shadows while his back is turned. He wasn't witnessing an encounter. He was standing inside one. Imagine this: one in front of you, one behind you, not wandering, not coincidental, positioned. Now apply the spatial data from the footage. Plot 3 points: the boulder, the secondary shadow position, and Daniel's GPS coordinates from his survey log. Draw a line from the boulder to the second shape. Draw a line from the second shape to Daniel. The angle at Daniel's position, 45 degrees. That's not a random distribution of two subjects across a clearing. A 45-degree pinch point is the geometry that maximizes observation coverage from two positions simultaneously. From the boulder, the primary subject maintains direct line of sight to the target. From 45 degrees, the secondary subject covers the exact angular blind spot the first position creates. There is no direction Daniel could have moved forward, backward, either flank, without being tracked by at least one of the two subjects at all times. This is the problem. Random animal positioning doesn't produce 4-5-degree coverage geometry. It doesn't produce overlapping observation fields. It doesn't produce a spatial arrangement where the target has zero blind escape vectors. That geometry has to be constructed, and we haven't even gotten to the terrain yet. The Steele Creek corridor wasn't chosen randomly. The granite formations flanking that ridge create what acoustic engineers call a whisper gallery effect. Natural parabolic surfaces that focus and channel sound in ways that are deeply counterintuitive to anyone unfamiliar with the terrain. Sound that would dissipate across open ground in seconds. Instead, travels along the canyon walls with extraordinary fidelity, compressed, directed, carried far beyond its normal effective range. Something positioned at the boulder's elevation, in that specific location, would receive acoustic information from the valley approach corridor at distances that exceed standard biological hearing range by a significant margin. It could hear Daniel coming, not minutes before he arrived, hours before. Between 2011 and 2022, 11 independent individuals working within that same 1-2-mile corridor reported a consistent anomaly, not creature sightings, not physical evidence. A sensation described in nearly identical terms across 11 separate accounts over 11 years. A sustained, directional feeling of observation from an elevated position. Several noted that it appeared to track their movement, that when they turned to look uphill, the perceived source adjusted its angle in response. Most dismissed it, filed it away. One wildlife biologist noted it in a field log, then struck through the entry. None of them had audio equipment running. Daniel did. He carried a high-gain directional microphone, standard environmental mapping hardware recording continuously throughout the survey day. He didn't review the raw audio until 3 weeks after the footage went public. What he found in the 12 minutes immediately preceding the 11:17 a.m. encounter didn't make it into any of the viral breakdowns. Total cessation of avian vocalization. No Steller's jays, no red-breasted nuthatches, no background canopy chatter that had been continuous for the preceding 4 hours of the survey. Silence, complete, immediate. In wildlife ecology, this has a name, a predator sync, the documented response of an avian community to the proximate presence of an organism so far above the local threat hierarchy that birds will not risk betraying their position through sound. They go silent. All of them, at once. The predator sync cleared 12 minutes before Daniel entered the clearing. The forest told him something was there. He didn't know how to read it. Now look at what the primary subject is actually doing. Every large mammal on Earth, every documented one, exhibits a measurable stress response to unexpected human proximity, sympathetic nervous system activation, observable postural shift, respiratory rate increase, orientation toward escape. This is hardwired survival architecture. It persists in every primate species, including animals habituated to human presence over years of controlled research exposure. The primary subject shows none of it. Respiratory cycle, slow, regular, unchanged. Posture, static throughout. The 1-7 second head rotation is not a startle reflex. It is a directed communication, and here is where the behavioral data intersects with something that has no precedent in wildlife research. In Special Forces doctrine, The spatial arrangement documented in this footage maps directly onto Overwatch Protocol, a two-element surveillance structure in which a static operator maintains an elevated observation post with direct line of sight to the target, while a mobile operator maneuvers in the target's blind zone. The static element doesn't engage. It observes. It communicates. It holds target lock. The mobile element operates freely because the static element has the target's attention. The 1/7-second head rotation is a positional update from Overwatch to mobile. Target position confirmed. Continue. This wasn't an animal sitting on a rock. This was a flanking maneuver. There's another possibility, of course. Maybe the head turn was random. Maybe the second shape was an unrelated animal. Maybe the geometry is coincidence, and the predator's sink was a hawk passing through. Maybe. But then we get to the timeline, and the maybe gets much harder to hold on to. This is where it breaks. Daniel's survey hardware logged GPS timestamps automatically throughout the field day. Time-stamped positional data from professional-grade equipment, the same class of hardware used in legal boundary disputes and environmental assessments. He logged through the access gate at 6:42 a.m. The encounter timestamps at 11:17 a.m. 4 hours and 35 minutes of movement through terrain navigated entirely via GPS. No trail markers, no established paths. His line of travel was determined in real time by topographic conditions, where the slope allowed passage, where deadfall forced deviation. His specific route was not predictable from any fixed external vantage point. And yet, the boulder he had eaten lunch beside the previous afternoon, concealed within the clearing, invisible from any ridge approach, had a subject seated on it, composed and settled, when he arrived the following day. Not caught mid-activity, not startled from feeding, settled. Respiratory cycle slow, arms at rest. The physical relaxation that kind of posture requires takes minutes to achieve, not seconds. Which means, accounting for the whisper gallery acoustics, the predator sink that cleared 12 minutes prior, and the fully composed postural state of the primary subject, whatever was on that boulder had been tracking Daniel through 4.5 hours of unmarked backcountry, projected his destination from his movement pattern, and arrived ahead of him with enough time to settle in. That shouldn't happen. Not with an animal. Not with any species in the documented fauna of the Northern Rockies. Animals don't predict routes. They don't pre-position at locations a target visited the previous day. They don't coordinate a 4-5 degree observation geometry and then sit in active non-response while a second element works the blind zone. This is not environmental coincidence. This is control. Stop here for a moment, because we've been asking the wrong question. The entire analytical community, 3 years of breakdowns, databases, behavioral taxonomy, has been focused on one question: what is the subject? That's not the right question. The right question is this: if something has the cognitive architecture to suppress an entire forest ecosystem, predict a human movement route across 4.5 hours of unmarked terrain, deploy a two-element, 4-5 degree observation geometry, and maintain composed active non-response throughout a 4-7 second camera encounter, then why show Daniel anything at all? Think about that. Something that capable of concealment chose to be visible. One subject on an open boulder calm, filmable, fully exposed. One subject in the shadows, mobile, undetected, never caught on camera. Why reveal the first and conceal the second? Why allow the footage but control exactly what the footage contains? Because this might not be about hiding. It might be about something far more deliberate. Not concealment, management. Not of the forest, of us. Carter Webb has spent 9 years building an encounter database with a specific taxonomic focus. Not sightings broadly, encounters in which the witness, upon systematic reflection, identified what he calls characteristics of managed observation encounters that felt less like stumbling upon a subject and more like being granted a controlled view of 73 verified cases, Pacific Northwest, Northern Rockies, Appalachian Corridor. In 61 of those 73 cases, at least one specific behavioral marker is present: a secondary anomalous disturbance in a position geometrically opposite the primary subject, a predator sink preceding the encounter, physical evidence suggesting a position was occupied before the witness arrived, or a primary subject demonstrating active non-response throughout. The Steele Creek footage contains all four simultaneously. Webb's conclusion, delivered carefully, with full acknowledgement of its implications, is what he calls the controlled leak hypothesis. A population with sufficient cognitive capacity would understand, over time, that complete concealment is strategically inferior to managed visibility. Total invisibility triggers aggressive search behavior. It mobilizes resources. It generates institutional momentum, drone surveys, thermal helicopter operations, coordinated ground teams, federal wildlife management protocols, but a population that controls its own evidence signature, that releases precisely enough ambiguous visual data to keep the observer community locked in the verification phase, prevents that escalation entirely. It keeps itself in the category of myth. And myths aren't hunted with thermal-equipped drones. They're not mapped with satellite telemetry. They don't generate federal management protocols. They don't trigger the kind of systematic environmental response that constitutes an existential threat to a population operating in remote wilderness. Webb's data suggests they've been doing this for 60 years. 60 years of footage. Thousands of witness accounts. Physical evidence analyzed by credentialed researchers, and the official scientific consensus remains unconfirmed. That consistency across 6 decades isn't a reflection of evidence quality. It's a reflection of evidence management. Unless we're missing something. Unless the controlled leak hypothesis is still not the deepest layer of what's happening here. Consider what a perfectly managed evidence signature actually requires. Not just intelligence. Not just environmental awareness, not just route prediction and acoustic exploitation and coordinated observation geometry. It requires an understanding of how human institutions work. It requires knowing that blurry evidence sustains debate, that ambiguous footage generates engagement without triggering escalation, that a footprint slightly too degraded for definitive dermal ridge analysis is more useful than no footprint at all. That a vocalization recorded just far enough away for species identification to remain inconclusive keeps researchers in the field, keeps them focused on the evidence rather than pushing for institutional response. That level of behavioral calibration doesn't come from instinct. It comes from observation, long-term systematic observation of how humans respond to each category of evidence, what triggers escalation, what sustains engagement, what keeps the conversation exactly where it needs to be. Which means, if Webb is right, if the controlled leak hypothesis holds across 61 of 73 documented cases, then the research has never been a one-way process. Every researcher who thought they were studying these subjects was also being studied. Every trail camera that captured a partial image captured exactly what was decided to be captured. Every piece of evidence ever recovered exists precisely because it was left. Daniel Marsh didn't walk into a clearing and accidentally find something extraordinary. He was walked into a demonstration. His camera, his upload, his 2 million views, and the 3-year digital deadlock that followed. All of it produced exactly the outcome that managed visibility is designed to produce. Engagement without escalation. Visibility without confirmation. Unconfirmed. Come back to the 1-7. Second mark one final time. The primary subject's head rotates toward its left flank, toward the secondary position. A positional update transmitted across the exact coordinates where Daniel was standing between 2 points in a conversation he couldn't hear. Carrying a camera he didn't realize was part of the arrangement. He uploaded the footage because he believed he'd finally captured something that would force a conclusion. He hadn't. He'd provided a data point. Daniel Marsh resigned his surveying contract 4 months after the encounter. He tried to return, did 2 more field days in different corridors, miles from Steele Creek. Both times, the same thing. The predator sink. The directional observation tracking his movement from above. The sensation of a calculation being run. He couldn't concentrate. Kept stopping to look uphill. He filed his final survey report in February 2020. He hasn't entered remote backcountry since. He carries a sidearm on maintained trail hikes with his family now. A satellite communicator stays charged and clipped to his belt whenever he's outside. He told Carter Webb in their final recorded exchange, "I used to think they were hiding from us. Now I think the ones who hide are the ones who decide we're not worth the attention. The one on that boulder made a different decision, and I've spent 2 years trying to figure out what I did that day that made it decide to show me anything at all? He hasn't found the answer. Neither has anyone else. But here's what the Steele Creek footage actually leaves you with. Not as a mystery, but as a logical conclusion drawn from 47 seconds of time-stamped field data. A predator sink, a 4-5 degree observation geometry, and 73 documented cases that share the same behavioral signature. If something like this can decide when it's seen, then every time you walk into a forest, the question isn't whether something is there, it's whether it decided you weren't worth showing itself to.